All right. Hi, everyone. We're live here with Adam of Dragonlance Saga, and David, and John, and I'm Tom. And so thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
Yeah, so I came across your stuff when I was I think I came across it before, but as I was prepping for Shadow the Dragon Queen and, research and stuff, and I just found it an invaluable resource. There's so much on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about what you do?
Well, it really comes down to just sharing what I like. I mean, most channels, when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role playing games, they sort of just start with their passion of playing the game, and then they'll branch out to different campaigns as they're released or different rule sets as they're released, and just sort of comment on the whole industry. I really like to just focus on Dragonlance because that's really where I sort of got my passion for tabletop role playing from. Reading the Dragons on Twilight and then wanting to emulate that in the Dungeons and Dragons game. And so I just thought there's no other channels that I could find that were solely devoted to Dragonlance that really did anything more than this is what a Draconian is in this edition of the game, or
Whoops.
No, we lost Adam. Well, I'm sure he'll be back on here in a minute. Um,
Yeah.
so let me go through and just kind of scroll through his website here, though they're coming back now.
weird.
Hey, Adam, you're back.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
You're talking about having read Dragons of Autumn Twilight and how there's no channels like associated directly with Dragonlance.
Yeah, and so I just thought if no one else is doing it, then I'll do it until someone comes along and does it better. And it's ended up taking my entire adult life over because like most of us, I work from home, and so anytime that I'm not actively working on a client's project, I'm thinking about, well, what video do I need to have to prep and research and produce for the next week, and what recipes am I going to make, or the people that I sent out sheet music to, ready to put the song together, and so I'm constantly sort of got this in the back of my head, kind of like an obsession. So yeah, I mean, as you can see as it's scrolling by, what I tried to do was break up everything into different categories. And I think I've been relatively successfully. You have your branding with colors for each category to try to clarify it for anyone who happens to stumble by. But if you never hit this front page, you'll never really understand that. You'll just see random new pages, new videos coming out every week. But it's just sharing my love for Dragonlance in all of its forms. And what I think is so great about Dragonlance and the way that it was put together by the founders there at TSR was that it's everything from poetry to short story form to gaming to music to recipes and food. And they really hype up the history of it. And I'm a big human history nut job. And so if you can have a fantasy world with a really deep, rich history as well, that just makes me connect more with it. And I don't know, I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, when I started reading Dragons of Autumn Twilight, it was like the first thing that came out at me too is like it's really a world.
Yeah.
Felt like a world that was being built like Tolkien built his world. They had a lot of investment into this, and yeah, you even have recipes,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you're started to run Dragons of or Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and I really liked what you did with the preludes there. How are you
Oh,
finding that
thanks.
adventure so far?
I think it's great. I think
Yeah.
they did such a wonderful job with it. I was so terrified. I'm not a fifth edition player, so I'm already a little bit uncomfortable with the setting. I like a little bit more overall danger with the game, and so I'd like players to feel like they have to think about encounters and consider whether there should even be an encounter, and instead of just running in and hacking at things all the time. I think this adventure did a really great job of presenting the dungeon master with opportunities to really challenge the audience and your players ultimately, and then also fit nicely in a little niche lore pocket. It's not perfect, but I think what they did with considering the challenge that they had in front of them, seemingly insurmountable, I think they did a really good job, and I'm really looking forward to continue playing. You just got to get those players together.
How far through it are you so far?
We're almost through with the first actual play chapter, so the chapter 3. We
Hmm.
went through the funeral, and in the next morning we had them going to meet well, now it's been 2 weeks, and so I can't remember the knight's name, but they're going to go meet the knight that's in charge of the town, and it's going to really kick off to craziness here really soon.
David's been playing in the campaign that I've been running. We just finished chapter 3.
Oh, nice.
And so I really liked how you brought the, what's it called? Broken Silence, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Where you bring the gods back in the
Yeah.
preludes. So the preludes are a little bit barren,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of room to add stuff. So definitely take a look at Adam's video at that if you're going to be running it, because I think you'll find a lot of good ideas there.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Definitely.
When it comes to, I mean, everyone has techniques as dungeon masters, in different, sort of tools that they are constantly referencing and bringing out in the game. I like to rely on the players. It not only does it ease the burden of my prep work significantly, but it also makes them feel like their backstory that they took time to develop has importance in the course of the game and the world itself. And so, I'd sat down and talked with Derek, who was playing that particular one, or the very first one of that version, together. And it was literally like 60 seconds before we went live, and he just sort of ran through his background, and I sort of bounced some ideas off of him, and then we just sort of riffed the entire session. And it's not a long one, and so it's not like it was, magical or anything, but it was intimate to the backstory that he created. And I'm just familiar with Kryn and the gods, and so it was easy for me to sort of wrap all of that together with his character. And little details, you don't have to have a ton of them, but one or two little details really make it feel special, Yeah. So whether it's a god referencing his past mother, or like that, I wasn't prepared for him to even say that. It actually got me a little bit misty when he brought it up. I was like, oh no. Real human emotion. What is this?
So how long have you? I mean, did you start reading the books right when they were coming out? And
yeah, so I had the books, as in the novels.
The novels, yeah.
I mean, I got to it, in like 89, I think. And so as they were being released, I would go to the library and just borrow every single novel I could, because they weren't. There's a time when Dragonlance novels were just released one at a time, and then in the mid 90s it seems like there was this huge influx of just a dumping of tons of novels all the time, and the library of Dragonlance novels just grew exponentially, and so I think it's over like 200 at this point, before they stopped writing them a number of years ago. So I have not read all of them, and to be quite honest, I don't really have an interest in reading all of them, because not all of them are great. I've read some real stinkers already.
You did a great article or a video about the splintering of the D&D worlds and the player base got splintered, and I think that's really true, and they're trying to avoid that. So they're not diving in deep to Dragonlance.
Yeah.
Do you think they could? Do you think that's something, if they went for it, they could get a lot of product out?
Yeah, I think the reason why it failed with TSR is because, again, they were cannibalizing their user base, but they also didn't have the actual financial backing to successfully do that, like focus on multiple brands and really develop each brand out. They were just running by the skin of their teeth without any actual capital at all. Wizards of the Coast, however, they're incredibly successful, and Hasbro backing them. I mean, they could set up entire Dungeons and Dragons game systems setting dependent if they wanted to. They can afford it anyway. Whether or not they'd be successful individually, I don't know. So yeah, I think at this point, either we have people sort of took over the license, and they were. Oh, was I out?
You were out for a second, but you're back now.
Okay, sorry. I think Wizard of the Coast could definitely do it if they wanted to. I don't think it would cannibalize the player base, because they have the financial backing that TSR never did. And I think the truth is people are already doing that. They're already focusing on what they like about Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to the other licensees who are creating content that they love, ignoring a lot of what WotC has already put out. And that's no different than if you just put out really deep dive source books for different campaign settings. So I don't know. I mean, it's a choice, and it's one that I feel like they did their due diligence on as far as branding is concerned. But as a fan of a specific setting, I think they're missing out.
So I've read through the first parts of the adventure, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and I'm not nearly as in deep in the lore as you are, Adam. But I found little things, and what I would do is I'd like Google every name I got to.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that until I got to a name that sounded somewhat familiar from the war game,
Yeah.
the Dragons of Glory war game.
You're right.
I
Right.
said, that name looks familiar. And then I cross referenced the name of the character in the adventure to that name in the war game. Like, oh, whoa, this is a really important NPC. So if you're going to be a player, definitely Google every name.
Yeah.
And have you found that? Have you read through the whole adventure yet?
I have only once.
Mm.
I've read through the section that I'm going to be running, multiple times before I actually get to running it. But yeah, the overall adventure only really just once.
Mm-hmm. Now you picked up the war game. What's it called?
Warriors of Kryn.
Yeah, Warriors of Kryn. How's that?
I love it. I think it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It primarily because it's not just you setting up your army, someone else setting up their army, and you just kind of go at it. With battle system back in the day, it was very convoluted. They tried to add in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons mechanics into the entire battle system, setup, and to varying success. I mean, I had fun playing it, but it did take 4 hours to get through one battle. This is a streamlined version where it's focusing more on the overall setting of the battle. The individual parties are there going toes, but you as a player are sort of running them, but also you have different tactics that you need to complete in order to successfully succeed or just to win this scenario that you're in. And if we're being honest, that's more important as a player than having each draconian drop to your elven arrow. You want to what's the point of the battle, and that also sets up stakes for the battle rather than saying whoever wins or loses is the ultimate victor. This sets it up as this is insurmountable. You will not have an opportunity of winning this, but that's not the point of this encounter. The point of this encounter is to rescue these citizens or collect these artifacts and get them back to your command tent. Like there's specific rules for each scenario that really make you feel like we're not going to win the War of the Lance doing this game. We're just going to be able to have minor successes, and even when you fail at those goals that each scenario presents to you, there's still like narrative role-playing elements that you can continue or repercussions in the overall game from them. And I have to be honest, it's not as integrated as I would really like seeing with the actual adventure itself and the characters that you're pulling out from the campaign. Your player characters, they're not really integrated as much as just classes, and then the powers themselves don't even really match up. So there's some disparity, but from a sort of an old school reconnection with AD&D version of Dragonlance, it's not bad.
John, David, you guys got any questions?
I do. One thing is, as somebody who's fairly new to Dragonlance, having just played this adventure,
oh, cool.
What and enjoying it, what sets Dragonlance apart from some of the other D&D settings that somebody might choose for their campaign?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it's going to be completely different of an answer depending on who you ask and what they love about it. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, Dragonlance has so many different aspects to it. Personally, what I think is the most significant difference is that it's set up on this premise of balance. And you're introduced initially into this setting in a time it's like a straight up dystopia. There's this huge cataclysm, this massive cataclysmic event that completely sundered the planet of Kryn. Everything that people thought was just and right and holy had turned up to be so innately dark and evil or distrustful that no one trusts anyone anymore. Like the Knights of Salamnia, which were supposed to be this pinnacle of justly, like a paladin, they are blamed for the cataclysm, and they're literally like thrown out of their castles by the people who are tending the land and other warlords. Then you have the orders, the wizards at this sort of orders of high sorcery that were seen as these mistrustful, sort of people with this incredible amount of power. Yet as everyone else's power is sapped away, and there's no more healing and no more clerics in the world because they vanished right before this massive cataclysm, wizards retained their power, and they all got it from the gods. And so there's this disparity of understanding depending on what organization you're in, whether or not the gods actually left, whether or not all the gods actually left, why they're ignoring all of this, the pain and suffering of the disease that is running rampant, all the massive regional warlords that are murdering and just committing atrocities all throughout for 350 years. So you just have this backdrop of hopelessness. But again, the setting is built on this sort of idea of the three pillars of good, neutrality, and evil. And so the point of Dragonlance is not to eliminate evil or vice versa, eliminate good. It's to maintain a semblance of balance so that there has to be good and there has to be evil. And that dichotomy, I think, is very different than every other game I've ever played. It's always been, well, they're bad guys, so let's go kill all the bad guys. Well, yeah, you need to defend yourself and you want to defeat the guys who are sort of tipping that scale of the balance. Like, for example, the War of the Lance was Takhisis trying to re-enter Krynn. She gathered so much evil forces that it turned that sort of semblance of balance that had existed before the Cataclysm. So that's evil tipping the scales. But then the cause of the Cataclysm was good becoming too self-righteous and too empowered. And so that tipped it in the good side. And so they had to literally sunder the planet in order to restore balance. So you just have this constant sort of struggle between light and dark that is not only echoed in the factions of the world and the different races of the world, but also within the races themselves. I mean, just looking at elves, you would think, well, all elves like each other because they're elves, but no, they're actually the most bigoted race of all of them. The Sylvanesti think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. The Quolansi are half pretending to be friends of man, and the Kagansi want nothing to do with anyone. Dwarves are the exact same way. You have so many different factions of dwarves, sort of subspecies of dwarves that are literally at war underneath the surface of Krynn at all times, even though they sort of live in this weird semblance of, this is my territory, that's your territory. It's very gangland-like in my interpretation. So it's the depth of the world, it's the basis of understanding of the world, and it's the deep history that's provided that I think, for me, really makes Dragonlance stand out.
Well put. After playing this adventure, if someone really enjoys this introduction from 5th edition to Dragonlance, are there places you would recommend folks go to find more Dragonlance? What would be a good next step for somebody interested in exploring the setting more?
This is bias. So I would say if you just want like quick lore information, check out my channel. I think that'd be a great start. If you want to read in-depth bits of information about Dragonlance and really sort of dive in, there's a great wiki that has been taken over by Dragonlance Nexus. That's dragonlance.fandom.com. It is a great resource for everything in depth, not like quick videos like mine about Dragonlance as a setting. But ultimately, I think people need to read more. Go read a book. Like, there's some great books, and not just novels, because again, sort of iffy on them. Source books. The 3rd edition source books for Dragonlance are the best source books to go to for any information. You had mentioned earlier on about how the fandom of Dragonlance has split, and that's largely due to TSR's own, failed machinations of having a successful business. But ultimately, because there's been so many people involved for so many years changing what Dragonlance is, you're going to have fans of different aspects of it and different game styles and stuff. So if you really want to get a good experience of Dragonlance, I would recommend learning how to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and playing through DL 1 through 14, because that is what Dragonlance came out of. That is the heart and soul of everything that is Dragonlance.
Do you happen to have a video that explores sort of the books in maybe a recommended reading order or some sort of suggestions about where to go for someone interested in reading more of the novels?
Right. I don't for the novels. I have reviews of novels as, I've sort of restarted, revisiting them and stuff. And there's a bunch of them already, but No, I think that's a good idea. I've seen other people create videos of, this is what you should read for Dragonlance, and because there's such diversity in authors and stories, you really have to struggle with Dragonlance of trying to figure out, is this person going to be interested in the War of the Lance era, pre-War of the Lance era, or post-War of the Lance era? Because that's going to inform you about what types of books you really want to present people. Ultimately, it's always Dragonlance Chronicles and Dragonlance Legends, which is two trilogies, the first two trilogies that were written by Margaret West and Tracy Hickman. Those are the best places to always go. And I think I might have to do a video about other avenues. Like if you really like the Age of Mortals, which is also referred to as the Fifth Age of Krynn, then these are the books that you should read. And, if you like the Age of Might, maybe try out some of these. The King Priest trilogy is amazing. So, if you just want to get away from Anslon altogether, which is just one continent on the planet of Krynn, which is set in the Dragonlance setting, there's a whole other continent that is almost completely separate in every single way, called Taladas. And, there's a trilogy of stories in that, which is amazing. I love that trilogy of books. So yeah, it's a tough question because it's so open-ended and it's so large at this point. I think the best thing to do would just say, read the Chronicles if you enjoyed those, read Legends, and if you enjoyed those, then let's talk, and I can direct you in the right way.
Cool.
That's cool. So tell us what you got coming up next, Adam. What videos are working on?
Let me ask the question. Come on, I want to ask my question.
Oh, go, John. Go.
No question for you. Back of the line.
So I had two, actually. The first one is, so I'm not playing in Tom's game. My home game I'm running will probably be ending the current campaign and then moving into the Shadow Queen adventure, or that path, sometime in the next couple of months. So I'm in this space where I'm preparing for it.
Awesome.
My players are not strong readers. If I was going to pick a hit list of your videos, what would be like 3 or 5 of them that would be or do you have like a playlist that would be the right like starting place for a group of players to give them the basics of the lore that they're going to need for that campaign?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough. The Dragonlance setting playlist that I have, which is the blue colored sort of splash screen images right there, that is all lore videos. And
Okay.
what I did when I started this is I wanted to start as big and broad as possible and then start narrowing in the field of videos. So, we're going down to individual people at this point.
Sure.
So I would suggest going at the very beginning of that playlist. Most of them are under 10 minutes. Some of them go a little longer. But that's, I think, is the best place, because you're going to start out with, what is Dragonlance?
Mm-hmm.
Why was it created? Who are the gods? What are the lands? What are the creatures? What are the races? And you're just going to slowly get from a very macro scale of what Dragonlance is all the way down to a very micro, depending on how far you want to go into it. But I think
knocked out looking at that list that Tom's scrolling through. It's like what I'm expecting I'm going to be able to do there is, okay, so we're 3 or 4 sessions in, but this upcoming session we're going to be going to this location or encountering this group, and I can send as pre-work this 8-minute video to the gang to have them just get some context for what their general knowledge would be about this place they're going into.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have, Witches of High Sorcery video, which would be really helpful. Knights of Salamnia, which would be very helpful. Different races, which would be very helpful. I haven't really spent a lot of time on regions, to be quite honest.
Okay.
Still. So I do have like Lands of Krynn and, like more Lands of Krynn and Lost Lands of Krynn stuff, but it is very broad overview information. It doesn't really get, like I did a video for Planthus that was really deep and detailed because of the saga source material. But as far as like regions, there's not a lot of really in-depth information for them. So, most of Shadow of Dragon Queen happens in Hinterlund / Estwild regions. And those two areas, though you have tons of information set in them, there's, at least as far as I am aware of, there's nothing really detailed of a sort of, 10,000 foot level of this is the history of this region and how it's changed. it is on my list of stuff to do, but
Cool.
because it's so insurmountable to try to tackle, it's going to take me a bit to get to it.
They
So
seem
then
to pick a really good location and a really good time for the adventure they did.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. Let's go ahead.
All right. So then the other thing I wanted to ask, we're going to be seeing a lot of Adventure League folks starting to write in Kryn and trying to write adventures that will, for their own home campaigns or for Adventure League play all over the world. To your mind, in addition to that idea of balance, which I think is critical, and it's really cool the way you articulated it, what are the other elements that need to be in an adventure that will make it iconically a Dragonlance adventure?
Great question. I think the same as every great story, right? I mean, so you want to have looming threats that need to be addressed either immediately or sort of a long-term goal. I think the idea of relationships is incredibly important because Dragonlance is it mirrors reality where there is hatred and bigotry for reasons that are generations old and not really understood logically. There is distrust because of actions that have taken place in eons before. Having that as a central core of, if you're a wizard and I'm a knight, I'm inherently not going to be trusting you right off the bat because, quite frankly, one, I don't know you very well unless we grew up like Huma and Magus, or just because I've been taught not to. You know, I think modern role playing is really great in wiping away biases because I don't think, I think racism is the stupidest, illogical thing out there, period. It doesn't make any sense, but it's a learned thought process.
Sure.
In this role-playing game, that's what this is. It's a learned process to distrust and hate people. So yes, you're going to have individuals who fall out of that norm, but as long as you set that norm up, I think that's kind of important. Genuine danger, like, I hate to bring it up because it is so sort of untoward, but Tika was almost raped by a draconian. There's danger of being assaulted physically, emotionally, and sexually throughout all of the Dragonlance novels throughout all the time. And I'm not saying bring that to your table because you have to know your table and what they're capable of dealing with. You don't want to freak anyone out. But understanding that in the context of a story, as long as it makes sense, challenge the sensibilities and morals of your characters and lean on alignment. Like that is the most important. I've got a video coming out next week about this. The importance of alignment in Dragonlance is incredible. Everything is based on it. So it set up something called the law of consequence. So if you act with your alignment, using it as a guide, of course, you don't have to be a clone of whatever you think a lawful or chaotic good character is, but if you're acting within your alignment, then you're rewarded by the DM. If you break out of that, the DM is tracking your alignment, and you could lose your connection to your gods. You could lose your connection to magic. It could completely change the style of your character because you as a player have made that conscious decision to ignore those character rules. So having consequences and rewards for players is really, really important, whether that's them going through a test of high sorcery or whether it's just them treating the baker down the street, justifiable or not, good or bad, but, justifiable based on how they're acting. Decisions about behavior is incredibly important. I just grew up thinking that's what Dungeons & Dragons was all the time. But as I've been exposed to more and more, especially 5th edition players, alignment, I read cover to cover the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's very played down. They rely infinitely more on one sentence references of roles and like thoughts and stuff in backgrounds than alignment, and that kind of blows my mind because I don't know why they're doing it, but anyway, that's what I would lean on heavily is understanding, being true to the players, having genuine consequences, and knowing that you may not make it out alive, but that's okay because that may make a good story. So as long as you're playing your character to the best of the character and not your personal emotions, that's the most important part.
Cool. Thanks.
I hope I
Good
answered the
answers. So,
question.
okay, so tell us what you're doing next, Adam.
Yeah, so
What's
I
coming
mean,
up?
just every single week I'm making new videos, and like for the setting playlist that you're showing right here, I do those the week before, and so I have one coming out about the law of consequence next week. I just finished a recipe episode, and I'm about a month out for all the other different types of videos. So I've got a recipe video coming out. I've got mail time videos coming out. Constantly. I've got someone working on some more music, and so I've got another Dragonlance song coming out, Dwarven Forge song. So that's just creating more content and hopefully getting to the game table and playing Shadow the Dragon Queen with the players.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Adam, for joining us. You're welcome to hang out here while we chat about some more other stuff. And I'll be checking your channel out for sure. I encourage other people to do the same.
Thank you so much for the time and you talking to me about this. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so who wants to go first, John or David? OGL? David, you want to cover that?
All right, well, let's talk a little bit
Let's
about
talk about
OGL.
All right.
Flashing back to 1999 when TS Wizards of the Coast just took over the failing TSR hobbies and had was trying to figure out how to make money from D&D with the new upcoming 3rd edition release. And looking at the finances and what went wrong with TSR. So one of the things they learned was that the products that were making money for TSR were the core books of D&D, and everything else wasn't making so much money. So, but Ryan Dancy, who was leading TSR or Wizards of the Coast's D&D business at the time, knew that for a role-playing game to be successful, they needed supporting material for it. And the problem is looking at TSR's books, none of that supporting material was making any money. So he came up with this plan where he would enable third parties to take on all the adventures and additions to the game that looked like bad business at the time. Well, TSR, or Wizards of the Coast, made all their money selling the core books. And the way they did that was they set up an open gaming license where you could publish your stuff with the open gaming license, which would make it D&D compatible. That would create the support material that the D&D business needed. Potentially, some of the innovations that people made under this open gaming license could be incorporated into future D&D games or games like D&D, enhancing the D&D business. It would expand the network of players playing D&D and games like D&D. And of course, the main thing that makes a role-playing game succeed is for people to be able to find other people playing. So the bigger the network of players, the better the business. It all sounded like a great plan, and it probably was. It succeeded on all those counts, but eventually Wizards of the Coast became a Hasbro business, and you have to know that there were business folks from Hasbro looking at the open gaming license and saying, wait, all these people are making money from things that are compatible with our game, and we're not even getting a piece of it. And I think that started a tug of war between the D&D loving team and the folks at Hasbro looking to maximize, what are they calling it, monetization of the product. And it created sort of a pendulum that swung back in 4th edition where they shut down the open gaming license. They created something called the game system license, and that was a massive failure. And by Hasbro terms, 4th edition was a failure too. 5th edition turned the pendulum the other direction again. They embraced open gaming license, and the game was a big success. But now we've got people who are not coming from D&D running the D&D business, running Wizards of the Coast, and they're talking a lot about monetization. And once again, they're looking at all these products that people are making for D&D where Hasbro's not getting a cut, and they're saying, what can we do to get our piece of this pie? So with one D&D on the horizon, we're looking at a situation where they're turning the open gaming license into a new version, which I think, Tom, you characterized as the limited gaming license, with new stipulations where folks who are making a lot of money from this new 1.1 open gaming license need to report their revenue if they make over $50,000, need to give Hasbro a little cut if they make over $750,000. And I think the hope is that they can nudge that monetization a little bit more in their favor, while not creating the sort of rebellion that they saw with 4th edition's gaming system license. And the hope is that they'll find a middle ground that keeps the community happy while continuing monetization of D&D. So that's my monologue here, and I'm going to let the rest of you guys react.
I think the worst part about what they're doing is that we can see through it. They're making a game system license. They're making a new open game license 1.1 that they'll release their SRD for. So now they control that. They can change it. We don't know what they're going to change it to yet. And they're telling us that they're doing OGL. Well, we can see right through what you're doing. You're not doing that. And so don't lie to us, or don't be disingenuous with us. It's okay if you want to keep all the money. That's fine. But don't try and trick us into thinking you're not. And how do we fight back against this? What do we do? What's the best thing to do? I mean, all we can do is try and inform them, hey, you'll make more money if you keep it open. I don't know if anyone will hear that or not. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's very hard for Hasbro execs and the Microsoft execs that are now, or the former Microsoft execs running things now in those Hasbro chairs that are in charge of D&D, to understand how much D&D has benefited from and depends upon a community of goodwill that games like Monopoly don't need. Monopoly and a lot of the other, Clue, all those other things, they don't have to have intellectually engaged community of people who are interested in creating and using and building with their game system to make it the vibrant thing it is right now. I don't think they have any frame of reference for that. And they're clearly not learning from things that they've done in the past. I think that this middle ground, I think what we're seeing is the folks caught in the middle, the people running D&D for Hasbro, trying to satisfy both. They're trying to meet the needs of the community, trying to meet the needs of their masters, and do it in a way that doesn't get them in trouble, doesn't get them fired. And that's a really, I feel for them. That's a tough place to be. Yeah, and they're all as passionate as we are. They all care about the game as much as we do. They're trying to keep these embers of things alive. And at the same time, part of me looks at the $750,000 mark in the sand, and I think, if I was making $750,000 on my D&D work, A, that would be $750,000 more than I'm making right now, and B, it would be an awfully fun problem to have.
Yeah. Now the problem with the 750 number is, right, it's income, not profit. So they're really taking the money from the people working for those companies, because the people, those companies will pay the people that work for them, and they'll have to pay some of that money now that used to go to their employees or was profit for them to Hasbro. So that's the sad aspect of it. Taxing a company, who pays for that tax is usually the workers of the company.
Is that
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, is that the biggest difference between what exists now and what's going to exist as far as the OGL, is that there's a cap?
Yeah, so the existing one, also, we don't know how they're going to limit the new one. So the new one's got a new set of rules, which we haven't seen, 1.1.
Right.
And the OGL for third edition was basically an open license that existed in perpetuity. And they released a system reference document for 3.0 that you could reference with that OGL. And then they came to fourth edition and they got rid of that. And you could write for fourth edition, but not using the open game license. Paizo, one of their biggest contributors, who did Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine, saw that and said, we can't work like that. We can't have a limited game license and be a company. So they went off on their own. They splintered the fan base, and fourth edition did terrible. And for a while, Paizo was doing better than D&D. And then they realized their mistake, and fifth edition came back and released the SRD, the system reference document for the open game license again. Now what they're doing is they're going to release an SRD for an OGL, but not the one we know. So we don't know yet the extent of how much they'll restrict things.
Okay.
So it's basically it's basically a game system license again. We just don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Yeah, here's the question that I'm trying to answer, and maybe you guys can shed some light on it. I know I don't know that anyone has any light to answer. Right now, the goal of the one D&D is to be backwards compatible with 5e. And the way they're putting it is we want it to be compatible with character options and adventures that we've already printed for 5e. So folks out now who wanted to create content for one D&D, they could make adventures based on the old OGL that would work with one D&D, and they could make character options based on the old license compatible with one D&D. Why would anyone switch to the 1.1 license? What's the gain?
I guess the only thing is going to be their intellectual property. Some way that they might open up Forgotten Realms or Ravenloft or Dragonlance. In order to write for those things, you have to be under the 1.1. So it'd be intellectual property driven, basically. And there's a few monsters and there's character classes and such that'll be limited. So the system reference document will say, like right now, you can't do artificers under the open game license. And they could open up artificers for people to write for, but only under the new license. So that's kind of where it impact people.
Do you think there's any side of this that's it's really sort of like our consumer culture where we want the newest version no matter what? So, I mean, I think that would be a driver, just human nature. We want the newest edition, the newest version of the game with every option, possible. And so for anyone that's thinking about publishing for the new one D&D, whether it's backwards compatible or not, there is going to be a certain amount of people who are going to only want to buy the one D&D version just because it's the updated version. It's the newest thing. And anyone that's sort of a rules is written person is really going to sort of latch on to that and try to be a completionist, especially if it's coming from a producer that they're already familiar with, from regular 5th edition. So I think that's the benefit, is that there is going to be a subset. Whether that's a large portion of the player base or not, I think is another argument. But
I think that's true. But I think that you can also, 5th edition learned a lot from other games and other versions of D&D, and so it is an amalgamation of a lot of things that the designers had learned in the process. And if you go back to some of the older versions, even go all the way back to 3.0 or second or first edition and stuff like that, that stuff can feel really dated when you get back into it in a lot of ways. 4th edition was a reflection of the important forces that were going on in gaming at the time too. And so there's all of these sort of influences that go into it. I think the most powerful stuff that's going on in 5th edition right now is a lot of the equity stuff that we're seeing. I find it really interesting. Adam, you were talking about all of the bigotry and racism that's inherent to the cultures in the Kryn setting. And what's interesting to me is the new version of the setting book doesn't enshrine any of that bigotry in the character descriptions and the race descriptions. The thing that really struck me, I read the first of the Destiny series this week because Christmas break, what are you going to do? But it's got this really strong element, really reminds you of all of that inherent racism around Kender that's just baked into the setting and the way characters interact. And I found that as I was reading it, that element didn't age super well in this new, much more accepting society that we're in than we were in the 80s when that was established as a trait. But the actual description of the Kender race that's in the new books has none of that in it. It doesn't describe them as perpetual thieves. It doesn't describe them as hated by other parts of culture or other cultures or whatever the cultures that they're embedded in. And you don't, they're even the skills and the stuff that's baked into it doesn't require that they all take sleight of hand and stuff like that and all be pickpockets. So it's like you can see that tension, that growth between where we were and where we are, just in the tensions there. There's culture and there's truth, or real truth. And we have the same things in our real society. There's things that we believe about other races, and there's things that are actually inherent to them, and they're completely not related.
Right.
Adam, I really thought you made a great point with talking about the latest and greatest kind of angle, because I think we saw that dynamic once before when 3rd edition turned into 3.5, and there was an absolute collapse in the market for 3rd edition branded or stuff that was out as intended to be compatible with 3rd edition. There was a collapse in the market for that kind of stuff, and countless volumes of third-party items for 3rd edition were pulped because 3.5 came out. And that happened even though 3.5 was supposed to be compatible back with 3rd edition, and in theory, all that stuff would work. But it wasn't the newest, and there were subtle differences, and people felt like this wasn't a fit for their game anymore. So I imagine that the business folks who are looking to monetize D&D to the maximum extent are hoping that one D&D and this new GSL will have some of the same dynamic in making people focus exclusively on the new 1.1 GSL and OGL.
All right. Next topic. I was going to go through the Adventure League updates real quick. John, did you have anything you wanted to cover?
Not real. I mean, the version you sent me had highlights in it. I think you're going to hit the high points I would hit. So just go for it.
Let's look at that. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Adventures League, that is like the in-house D&D club, basically trying to get people to play. And David found something out very interesting. Share this tab here. So if you go to Adventures League on Wizards' website, you'll come to this page here, and you'll have some rules here, version 12.1 for how you make a character. Unfortunately, those aren't the current rules. So the current rules are actually, if you go into the Discord channel, and they have it there. So my first thing, Wizards, please, if you have rules, only have them in one spot or have them match, because that's horrible for a DM to have to tell a player, well, the rules you printed out aren't the right ones. That's a terrible thing to have to do. So then let's look at the new rules. And this has got some interesting changes in it. This is the Player's Guide, version 13. December 19th is when it became in effect. And here's a point. Oh, let me share that.
We're not seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, let me share that real quick. Boom. There you go. Here's an interesting point. I don't think these ever went out for comment. And they used to be pretty good at putting stuff out for comment and saying, hey, do you guys like these changes we're proposing making? I don't think these went that way. But the big change here is they make you choose a campaign for your character. So attach your character to Forgotten Realms or Eberron or Ravenloft or Dragonlance, and you can't switch. Well, right away, Ravenloft was always a campaign that you got drug into, and if you did the right thing, you got back out of. So that's a weird thing to say, well, you can't be a Forgotten Realms character that gets drugged into Ravenloft, and then when you kill Strahd, you get to go back to Forgotten Realms. So maybe that might, hopefully they'll see the light there, and that might change. But overall, what are your guys' thoughts on that from the DM? I guess from a DM perspective, you're going to play at the local game store, players are showing up to play, and you run an Eberron, and they have some AL characters, but they're Forgotten Realms.
I mean, doesn't this fly in the face of what they're doing? Like, they're actively trying to like play down settings.
Yeah, it does.
This doesn't make any sense at all. To then lock characters into a specific setting when all of your game materials speak to the contrary.
Right, and you have even what is it, Spelljammer now, where you supposedly can go between realms.
And even Planescape's coming out next year, I think. So
yeah, Planescape. As a DM, if I sit down to run an adventure, I want to run an adventure, and I want players to be able to play it. And if they only have a Forgotten Realms character, bring them on. Who cares if it's Eberron? I mean, I'll do some, maybe ask them to reskin some stuff, maybe, or do some background tweaks or something like that. But play your character that you like. Whereas I see a lot of the responses to me asking this question online was, nope, they got to be Eberron. It's got to have Eberron background, Eberron feel, or else I don't want them to play, which seems pretty bad to me. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I understand the tension here. They want to try and make the campaigns feel like campaigns with characters entering and staying in that particular spot. But absolutely, it's not easy to keep walls between these campaigns when casual players maybe only go to a convention once a year and show up at a table and they have one or two characters and they got to find something to play.
John?
I think that what the decision to allow people to play in whatever campaign with whatever character and just do it, it'll be fine, is great when there's scarcity of options and there just aren't as many adventures to play, there aren't as many tables to play at. This reflects a worldview where there are lots of choices, that you probably got a folder full of characters that you can play, and they want you to try and commit one to Eberron and one to Forgotten Realms and one to Ravenloft. And you can choose, if you want to play Ravenloft, there's going to be a table for you to play at. That kind of complexity, that kind of choice options reflects probably a lot more online play, especially with their monthly digital weekends and stuff like that they're doing now. That kind of option, that kind of choice isn't true for most of the sorts of folks who have one game that's going on at a local game store on Thursday nights when they're free to play. So
yeah, it really splinters the player group. I think it's I'm seeing fewer and fewer people at the VDDW games. And I think it's because there's like 10 different things to do and you don't know what to do and you don't have that shared experience, and I like that if they focus on Eberron, yeah, that's awesome. A lot of story of Eberron and stuff like that, but don't do that to exclude half your players. That feels like it's just splintering, just like making a bunch of different worlds splintered the D&D campaign groups or D&D world. And it feels like that's doing the same thing.
At the same time, they've got access to a ton of data that we can't see. So they may be making decisions based on what they're seeing in that data, which tells them that, okay, Thursday nights in, Poughkeepsie, New York, are the game that they're running is pretty much just running through the Eberron thing 1 through 20. So this isn't going to hurt those people. They're going to make characters, they're going to play that. They may be able to see, if they're coding their data right, that there's that kind of consistency, that kind of stuff going on, that they know that at conventions there is enough choice. I mean, it's very hard from the outside to appreciate the resources they have and the data that they're seeing to make these decisions.
Well, given they can't have the same rules in two locations at once, I'm not highly confident that that's happening.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if this decision is just to gather that data of saying, well,
Yeah.
which settings should we maybe develop a little bit more for the really devoted fan base?
That's a good point.
I think, Forgotten Realms has gotten so much time and attention. Is it justified in players? I think it's a valid question to examine. And to your point, John, you need analytics to determine that, not just opinion. So yeah, as long as this is like a temporary data research thing, then it makes perfect sense. If it's not, then it is a little bit strange because, to your point, they're doing the exact same thing with the player base that they're trying not to do with the campaign setting of fracturing. So yeah, it's interesting.
It'll be interesting to see if in D&D Beyond we start getting a choice thing that will tell us what campaign world we're playing in, just as the first choice we make the character, and that will drive a ton of data for
That's
that.
how they could know. They won't know from AL games. They don't track AL games, so they wouldn't know.
Yeah, I think I think they got a ton of data out of D&D Beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so other changes. This is not a new change, but when you gain 5th level, you can pick one of the magic items. Used to be you could pick a bunch of magic items, or you could take as many of these as you wanted, up to your limit. They added the feat for everyone to match what they're doing with 5th edition, or no, with 1D&D, where everyone starts with an extra feat, and what they've been doing with Dragonlance with an extra feat at first level, and I think Spelljammer might have had an extra feat at first level. I don't recall. And then the rest of the stuff is pretty much unchanged. I highlighted it yellow just because it's important things, but let's see, you cannot trade. Okay, you can't trade between campaign worlds, so that just matches the thing at the start. And then they have an appendix here. Oh, I didn't even get to the appendix. I didn't highlight this at all, but here's where they can pick the books that go with the different campaign worlds. And, I'm all for this in general. I'm not all for it when I show up to a tournament or to a convention and have to turn players away because they don't have the right character.
You've always been opinionated about trading between characters.
Yeah, I hate trading because it creates a thing where the people who have lots and lots of characters trade the magic items, this big stable of magic items, to their current character they're playing, and therefore their current character is much more powerful than a generic player who has only one character and only access to that character's magic items. Now, I don't think that, I never feel that way when I'm sitting at a table. I could care less. So I don't know why I have this sense of fair play as a DM that I don't care about as a player, but I do. I don't like, hey, you're taking advantage of the system and a lot better than this Joe player over here who's brand new and it's not fair to him, but he doesn't care. So I don't know why I care. What do you guys think of trading magic items?
One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that for a lot of those players who come out and play at these conventions over and over, like they're dedicated, diehard players, that sort of mastery in gaming the system is how they get their pleasure out of it.
Yeah.
And changing the rules takes pleasure away from these people who we need to be rabid fans of the game. I don't think it's worth messing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. The things I've seen that rub me the wrong way as a DM at the table have been some of the items that have appeared in the hardcover books that I think are not as available as they used to be, the Dawnbringers and whatnot. They've been the automatic awarding of the Cloak of Invisibilities. I know that people, DMs found that hard to cope with. And the trading hasn't so much been an issue. Simulacrums have been an issue that I've seen at tables. There's nothing in here about that, but as a DM, you can still politely ask that your players not bring their simulacrum, I suppose.
Yeah, you can. In fact, what's it say about a DM? This is the DM's guide. Here we go. Disruptive magic items. You may wish to discuss temporarily removing the item from the character's carried magic items and allow them to choose another item. It says don't do this on your own preference, but only if it's disruptive. Somewhere in there it says that.
But of course, you're the judge of whether it's disruptive.
Right.
It's not your preference.
It's not my preference, but it's disrupting. Other players don't even know what it means. Don't know what it is. All right. So that's all I had. Any last words, David?
Well, I have one other thing struck me is we're seeing what's a welcome mention of safety tools here.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't DM'd at any conventions since this, sort of came into prominence. And I'm interested at Winter Fantasy to see how other DMs handle this discussion. So
I DM a lot for the virtual weekends, and we are supposed to mention the safety tools in like the intro on the channel for the game. And before the game starts, we're supposed to kind of run through them real quickly. And interestingly, I have never yet seen it used in play in a lot of games. So it's there. If anyone was concerned, they should be, I guess, feel comforted. But it's very rare. Never have seen it used.
Yeah, I did once several
did.
years ago run an adventure that at the time I ran it, this was at a convention that I ran it. At the time I ran it, it didn't have any content warnings, but later when it reached its final version on the DM's Guild, it did. And I kind of wish that when I ran it, it didn't lead to any obvious issues, but I do kind of wish that when I'd run it those years ago, I'd had a little discussion about the content in the adventure at the outset, and at least asked the players how they wanted me to handle what could have been, disturbing bits, whether they, wanted me to fast forward past them or how they would feel most comfortable with it. And so
yeah,
I think this is a good direction.
I naturally fast forward through stuff like that when I'm DMing in a convention, but it's nice to know that there's a backup in case something I think is still safe, someone else thinks not, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I'll fast forward through things that are really, really bad, but there might be some things that are still bad enough that people would like me to fast forward through, and there's a tool for doing that. And a setting like Dragonlance, if you read the original material and stuff, I mean, it's a war. It's going to be really bad. There's going to be some really bad things happening, and you don't necessarily need to have that at the table. So it's good to have a system like this.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because, I mean, you mentioned you never see it used. I think our sensibilities, our modern sensibilities says that we need to have so much more protection in place just in case. Mm-hmm. When I think the reality of people actually playing this game is dramatically different. That you're playing a game where you're cutting people up, you're bashing their brains in. Like this is not, it's not a cartoon, it's fantasy. It's real or graphic or not as you want it to be. But inherently you're fighting and defeating people. So I've always been a little bit shocked by the clutching of pearls when it comes to this game in modern times. Like that, it's baked in. Like you're stealing from people, you're murdering people, and you're going to be upset by someone doing it to you.
Yeah, it is a real strange dichotomy of what's happening. I mean, some players, if I'm running for my kids, none of that happens, right? If I'm running for my 5-year-old kid, they're still fighting monsters, but there's nothing.
Yeah, you're definitely playing it down.
Yeah, when I'm running for my
speaking to the audience,
30-year-old friends. So here's, I'm just going to share what it looks like on a game. Share this tab. Should be seeing my Roll20 page. There we go. So I just have a folder called safety, and if a person wants, they just drag this card on the table, and the whole table turns red. So I know away someone's done something. And there's other cards too for things where I don't make the whole table turn their color, but I probably should. So because as a DM, who knows where I am on this, 100 by 100 grid page.
So is this because tools like these, are they because you're playing with players that you're not familiar with? And
Yeah.
that's why you're not like, you don't have that sort of beforehand conversation of, hey, you know, like, what are you not comfortable with? Like let's
Yeah.
just get the elephant out of the room so we never have to deal with it.
Yeah.
It seems like it would almost be intimidating for someone who is triggered in that way mid game to then point a finger at them saying, I can't handle that. Stop. You know, they
Yeah.
might be, they
No,
might
you're
not
right.
do
And
it.
you're
because
right.
of
And
that.
it's anonymous actually. So when I do it I tell people when I'm like doing the intro, show it. When they take this card and drag it to the screen, no one knows who drag it to the screen.
Oh, that's good.
And I tell them they don't need to announce anything.
Yeah.
If I'm in the middle of describing how a spider's cocooning a little baby, and you don't want to hear that,
Yeah.
then you drag that to the screen, I stop, and I move forward.
Nice.
So can you do it if when a player's talking and you're just tired of their shit?
Yeah.
I
need
got
a
a
shut
guy.
up card. I need a safety shut up card.
Yeah.
Right here. Or stop rules
I'm
lawyering.
surprised you guys hadn't pulled out on me already.
I think that we need to just sort of accept the idea of these tools, especially as Wizards gives them to us, as sort of a CYA thing that they have to do, because they are creating these environments where we are exposing people to potentially tough subjects, and we don't know the people, we don't know their sensibilities. So we just need to warn them. It's, you know, a peanut allergy warning outside a peanut butter factory.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
if you're allergic to peanuts, maybe don't come in. But
You're
have
welcome
tell
to,
you,
but
You can come in.
yeah. But welcome to GIF factories, but really stay on the bus because peanuts.
now I want
Glad
some
you
peanut butter.
enunciated that properly, John.
Sorry.
John, did you have any final words?
No, I think I've already babbled enough.
All right, Adam, how about you?
Just want to say thank you very much for you know, taking the time, and I love what you guys are doing. I love talking gaming, and this is great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And have a good holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.